Right on. Well, it's great to have you in the lexicon, to have you in the lineup. I really dig Looms and Legends. I've already had it on the show, so I'm looking forward to peeling back the layers of not only the album, but your career and what's going on. So thank you for taking a minute out today.
Sure.
So before we get into Looms and Legends, my first question is something that I've been wanting to put to rest, but it's just too big, and it's
Uh,
COVID. Five
oh,
years ago, this COVID thing was changing everybody's lives, especially musicians and in more particular in specific ways in the jazz community. How did you get through that era? And how did it change the way that you make music and do things today?
oh, it's kind of a big question because it was a watershed moment, and I'm not gonna go too deep into personal stuff, but it actually had there were some large changes in my life personally that are very positive that may not happen without COVID. I mean, COVID was a push or uh, what my dad used to call it a shit or get off the pot moment for a lot of people.
Yep.
And so, but well, I'll give you some interesting things though, just professionally.
Sure.
So, I mean, Looms and Legends is, I have been particularly active. It's certainly hardly the only thing I do, but I've been particularly active in solo performance all these years and playing woodwind instruments. I don't play the instruments that are typically used by solo performers. I mean, we know Coleman Hawkins and Picasso, we know Anthony Braxton, but anyway, one of the things that happened in COVID, which was interesting, is I was teaching this solo performance class up at Berkeley in the 2010s. I had been working up at Berkeley partly because, I grew up in Boston, my roots were there, my mom was still alive, and I was helping out with her in her old age. She passed away in 2018, and I didn't want to spend so many hours driving the Merritt Parkway and other late night dangerous roads. And I moved my scene back down, teaching thing back to New York to the new school. And I started teaching the solo performance class at the new school. And then lo and behold, and this is a class for all different instruments, for people, just the whole dynamic of playing alone, whether you're a jazz player or even a classical player playing repertoire. It's a very different thing being alone on a stage. Lo and behold, COVID happens. And suddenly there are no one, the ensembles can't get together. They're trying to have people play by overdubbing, on web digital audio apps and things like that. But suddenly, the new school was saying, well, Ned, can you do a workshop with all the other teachers about solo performance? Because basically what they started doing was having the brass, the percussion, having each department have a solo performance class. And that was a very interesting thing in terms of exchanging ideas and helping students develop, work on something very specific that they could work on in a time when they were isolated. I do think that all of the schools, in retrospect, have to admit that it was not a ideal educational situation for people to be isolated and not be able to play together. But for my particular, I teach a few different things, but for that particular angle of pedagogy, there was a lot of development because people were isolated. And it's how do you, everybody plays solo all the time, every time they practice. But this is a performance. How do you practice for performing by yourself? And how do you develop, how do you develop musical skills in isolation? Obviously, people had the internet, which was a very different situation than going back years where, you had to go out, buy records, work off playing with records and all of that. People still do that. Anyway, it was an interesting time for me in that respect, and I managed to develop some ideas and that have expanded and elucidated my work in this area. In terms of, professionally, there were some, funny, halfway through COVID, Sylvie Courvoisier and I managed to get back to Europe to try to do a European tour. I think we had like 12 gigs, of which 6 happened because of all sorts of various shutdowns. On one of the gigs that didn't happen, we managed to make a record, which we called Lockdown, with Julian Sartorius, a Swiss drummer. People were seriously, it wasn't just about improvised music. People were seriously improvising in terms of how they managed to have performances. We had a performance in Paris at the Swiss Institute where the audience was told not to clap because it wasn't technically legal for them to be in there. So it was like we did a number on that tour of broadcast performances, like at Porgy and Bess in Vienna, where and there was a number of things of performances like that where you were just performing for the stream. But then there were some ones where they like sneaked an audience in there, and that was in the middle of Paris. To go to Paris and have the streets be empty, and people buying food in takeout containers, which of course the Parisians never figured out how to do takeout. There were some very funny and things that happened, but then of course there were also tragic kinds of things professionally, and one of the most strange thing was the musicians. Musical competition became, you see these posts from people, these are all the gigs I lost. Oh, well, I lost even more gigs than you. Yeah. I mean, this kind of thing. We waded through it. We got through it. There were good things that never would have happened otherwise. There were a lot of terrible things. And of course, the most terrible things were the loss of life, and things that happen in the society generally, and the fracture of societal belief in medicine, and there's some much bigger issues which we're still very much dealing with today. Rise of crazy conspiracy theories and all of this.
So talk to me about the new album, Legends and Looms. What was the overarching vision for this project?
Well, I hadn't made a solo record for quite a while, since I think 12 years, since 2012 or 13. It was overdue. It's something I've done at least every 5 to 7 years over the course of my career. And it's a central kind of, I made a record years ago called The Crux, because there's this, in my work, there's a certain central role that solo work plays. But meanwhile, I'd done a lot of concerts, and the work that my playing had evolved. It was time to document it. I did have this image of, Looms and Legends is about these areas of focus, about half of which is what I call kind of musical fabric. That would be represented as looms. This is the kind of repetitive, minimal, circular breathing based work that I do. And then Legends is much more narrative work. Maybe more standard in that, melodic pieces that start in a place and try to take you in a kind of narrative flow, kind of tell a story. And so that was the two sides. And then I just like I always do, I just did a lot of practicing and found focus of what the areas were I wanted to deal with, and worked together with my old partner in crime, Marty Ehrlich, who is I've known going back. We're getting towards 45 years, and he knows my playing intimately, and is somebody I can bounce ideas off of. And if he plays the same instruments I play, and so we worked together in the studio, recorded a lot of material, honed it down, and the result is what you have.
So, how did this journey into the music and more specifically jazz begin? It's 30 plus years. How did it all start?
Oh, well, it's even more than 30 plus years, but I, uh, I grew up in Boston. I had a mother who was a very good amateur classical pianist, and a father who was a total jazz head, uh, playing Billie Holiday and Louis Armstrong all the time. He also liked cool jazz. And I remember bringing home Charlie Parker and, trying to get him over the bebop is too weird hub. Um, I grew up playing both classical and jazz, taking Sonny Rollins solos off the records, and I do guess that Sonny had a big influence because that whole kind of more thematic approach to jazz playing was always appealed to me. Um, and one of the cool things about Sonny Rollins was, unlike Coltrane, you couldn't really imitate him,
Yeah.
because it was all about his flow of ideas. And so you could copy a solo, but it didn't really clue you into what the next thing was. And but I also continued to expand my interests in more avant-garde kinds of music, listening to like the Art Ensemble and European improvisers. I have to say, because I was always focused in a wide range, and while jazz was a foundational music for me, I was never concerned about whether I was playing jazz. And certainly one of the things I wouldn't want to get into in this interview, because it's so over hashed, is like jazz definition. What is jazz? What is not jazz? Let's just say I have never been concerned with whether or not I was playing jazz. I've always wanted to play my own music. And so my music is a amalgam of all these different interests I have. And sometimes it goes closer to something that people would identify as jazz, and sometimes and Looms and Legends is no exception. There are songs on there that I would very much think people would call jazz, and there are things that people would say this is not jazz at all. And you know what? I'd say fine. I don't have any defensive, because, as we know, the term is something that came later. And even the greats of jazz like Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong didn't love the word jazz. So I play a wide range of music. My solo music, my ensemble music, it all reflects that. And I did that from a very early age. But the skill set of jazz, in terms of improvising with harmonies and thematic development and a wide variety of rhythmic kinds of feelings and dance-based forms. I love dance music of all types. That was profoundly influential.
What was the first live show you saw that blew you away, that made you think, I want to do that one day? Did you have a moment like that?
Mm. Um, oh well, there were numbers in terms of when I thought I wanted to do it. By the time I was, I was a music jock. Just like some kids could play sports, and some kids, I was in the band, and kids do the things that they get positive reinforcement from. So I'm playing in the band, and my drummer friends say, "Hey, Elvin Jones is playing at the Jazz Workshop in Boston," and sure, we'd go in and see the show. Any numbers of shows. Back in those days, there were this pair of clubs on Boylston Street in Boston, the Jazz Workshop and Paul's Mall, and everybody played there. And we were underage, and as a result, you had to go in and just hang around outside and see if they would let you in, because it would depend on how many tickets they sold. Like, you know, when they still had some seats left, they would let the 15-year-old and 16-year-olds in. And so as a result, I saw many great masters back then, and there were people I didn't get in to see. You know, I didn't get in to see Monk. It's funny, I remember not getting in to see Monk, not getting in to see Miles, but I did see Mingus and Elvin and on multiple occasions, Art Blakey, Anthony Braxton, that first band with the first time George Lewis was playing with him, and Dave Holland and Barry Altschul, and just a few years later, I was playing in Anthony's Creative Music Orchestra with George, and so all those concerts back then were profound. On the other hand, when I was like 12, I saw the band at Harvard Stadium. That, you know, that certainly felt like, wow, what a dream to be able to be in a group where the people are as hooked up as this. And even at that age, I never had a sense that, oh, I'm a jazz head, I can't like this, or I'm I always liked all kinds of music.
So, what is it that you love the best about being a professional musician? What gets you up every day? What motivates you to evolve and to love being a musician?
Uh, I think all great musicians are nerds. And some of us who whether we call it, I don't want to call myself a great musician, but basically you have to have a nerdy interest in things.
Yeah.
You know, you have to be into details. You have to be you have to become obsessed with something. And there's all kinds of, I mean, it's all in Looms and Legends. There's all these weird sound languages and things that clearly you can tell that I've spent a lot of time parsing out what these instruments can do, and then trying to reconstruct with this new language that I've developed a personal music and a personal voice. That's what I think distinguishes quote unquote creative musicians from what I would call repertory musicians. And I, you know, especially when I first came to New York, I certainly worked very hard on repertory. I played shows and you know, theater shows, and you know, I've worked on my instruments for their quote unquote normal commercial roles. But I was always very interested in figuring out a special way that only Ned Rothenberg plays. And to be immodest, whether you love my music or find it too weird, anybody who's heard much of it can identify that it's mine within a few seconds. And that's honestly something that I value when I hear all of my heroes. You know, Thelonious Monk hits literally a single note on the piano, and you can tell it's him.
Yeah.
That whole thing of having a sound is what that's the goal. That's my personal goal. That's the thing that I most appreciate about creative music, and the endeavor of developing a personal voice.
For sure. So, at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you: family, friends, fans, everyone on the bandstand, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Well, I just go back. I'm just another nerdy guy who's worked hard at a certain musical vision. You know, it's very funny because in this music, there's a lot of, you know, style points. You know, people love to talk about how like Miles dressed, But you know what? Miles was a nerd about how he dressed. He studied all these clothes. He studied all this stuff. Coltrane may have been this, guy who just blew everybody away with his command of all this intervallic language because he was practicing 10 hours a day. And, so everybody has this particular, I suppose I should figure out a more sexy term than nerdy. Maybe it's just obsessive, yeah. But you have to go deep. And this is the thing I'm always telling students, because I feel like in this age of the internet, everything is available all the time. And there's this tendency, and I find it among young people now, oh yeah, that's cool, that's cool, that's cool. But like I say, if you want to develop a voice, you've got to go down a rabbit hole or multiple rabbit holes and really go deep into things. And when you say, who am I? I mean, I'm this weird guy who has gotten into a particular kind of woodwind language, also is very influenced by all kinds of world music from all over the world, and in what I would say is a deep fashion, meaning I have really studied this stuff, and I figured out what aspects of it I can interact with, what aspects are just beyond me. So you make selections about what you can use, what you can only admire, and I have a particular set of musical obsessions. And the wonderful thing about music, and why when you ask, why do you feel lucky to wake up and be a musician, is that it is so rich, and it's endless, and it's not about, when you say, well, what are most people like in the United States obsessed with? They're obsessed with sports. And sports is something that you can always quantify, and you can argue about, is this guy better than that guy? And this kind of, frankly, not so interesting to me. But the worst thing that I find happens with music and in the age of the internet and also certain magazines is trying to make music into a sport. Is Rollins better than Coltrane? Is Sonny Stitt better than Cannonball Adderley? Give me a break. These are all artists. This is not, and the whole thing with polls and all this garbage is just a way to market music and make it mirror sports, which has this very visceral appeal. But musicians are really not interested in that. The degree to which they participate in it, I think, is just a kind of promotional necessity, because that's the language that people talk about. But when you're talking about artistry, you're talking about. I have a friend who is one of the greatest chess players on the planet, Levon Aronian, but he's a total music fan. And one of the things he says to me is, the thing I love about music is no matter how many musicians I know, and he's a real nerd who's, listens to music all the time, there's always people I can discover that I've never heard of. Whereas in chess, of course, if you play at the top level, people will find you, and there's only, it's like a pyramid, and the best players play each other, and that's it. But in music, it's a vast thing. There are always people you've never heard of who have unbelievable, profound voices, and that's really magic. And I also get a kick out of these things where I get sent things where they say, pick your top. What are the top records you've been listening to this year that came out this year? Well, if you talk about musicians, especially musicians who've been around as long as I have, the record that might be blowing me away this year might be something that Milton Nascimento recorded 30 years ago that I never heard, or it might be some kene player from Laos who I never heard, and I just got heard about it this year, and suddenly I'm listening to something. It could be of any age, because there is always so much new music. There's so much stuff you don't know, and I can tell you because I deal with young people, college age students who want to be musicians. What they don't know would blow your mind.
Yeah.
All they know these days are their local heroes. When I'm talking to young saxophone players and they don't know who Lee Konitz or Lou Donaldson is, I'm like, are you kidding me? But they don't, and some of the people that I see, I was giving a clarinet lesson the other day. I was talking about Eddie Daniels, who I just saw you interviewed. This kid didn't know Eddie Daniels. I was like, man, you got to check these people out. Yeah. And meanwhile, he's reading a magazine where it's like, what happened this year? Like that's the whole thing. Eddie Daniels has a whole career of music that he's put out. This kid has a whole lot of homework to do. And that, if he's calling himself a jazz clarinetist. So music is vast, and it's not a sport.
Right. I totally agree. So Looms and Legends, if anybody wants to pick up a copy, catch you live, any of the other good business in your world, where do they go?
Well, given the way things are today, I would encourage everybody to go to Bandcamp.
Yes.
Bandcamp, if you want to support the music and you want to support musicians, Bandcamp is the only place where a significant portion of the money you pay for media actually goes to the musicians. And if I was going to make a little plea here, do not go to Spotify. Spotify is the absolute devil. Apple Music is much better, but Bandcamp is the place to go if you really want to support the music.
Excellent. I will put all of those links in the show notes. Ned, this has been wonderful. So great to meet you. Thank you for your passion, your stories. I appreciate it.
All right, man. Joe, thanks so much. Nice to meet you.
Yes. Great.